Hello, everyone. Appreciate you joining us again today. If you've been keeping up with us, we've been doing some messages or some videos on the end times. And today we're going to be looking in the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to be specifically looking at chapter 24. Now, we're not going to be able to cover the whole chapter in one video. In fact, we probably won't be able to cover it in two videos. But when you hear a preacher that says that they're going to be preaching from Matthew 24, usually what that means is they're going to be preaching about the end times. Now, there's been really a lot written about Matthew 24. In fact, I believe I have in my library a whole book that's just on chapter 24 of Matthew. So we might ask this question: Is this chapter about the end times? And I would just have to say that it is about the end times, but not all of it is. Some of it has to do with a different time. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but let me just explain a little bit what it means. It means that there's a lot of similarity in the text of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And if you read all of those and all of those Gospels, you'll see that a lot of them have a lot of similar scriptures that are in them and discourses. Another thing I wanted to mention when you're studying Matthew chapter 24 is it would be a good idea to be able to look not only at Matthew 24, but to look at Mark chapter 13 and Luke chapter 21. Now, the reason for that is all three of those chapters are talking about the same subject. Now, each one of those books and each one of those chapters are talking about the same subject. Now, I will say this, that each one has something a little bit different than the other. So I'd like to encourage you, if you're interested in studying about the end times, that those three chapters, that would be Matthew 24, and it would be Mark 13, and Luke 21. And so you'd want to study all of those together. So I just wanted to kind of encourage you to do that. Also, I wanted to mention this to you, that in Matthew 24, Jesus' discourse begins after the disciples do something. The disciples wanted to show Jesus, or had pointed out to Jesus, the buildings that were in the temple. Now, the temple was the most important place for the Jews. It was a focal point of their worship. And by all accounts, the temple, it was called the Temple of Herod, Herod's temple. It was a magnificent building. I believe, I don't have any reason to believe that that's not true. So they were showing Jesus these buildings and wanted, just pointing them out to him. And what's interesting is when Jesus responded to them showing him the buildings, he said something that was unexpected. And I want to read that because that starts off in verse 2. Let me read verse 2. So this is Jesus' response to them. He said, and Jesus said to them, do you not see all of these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, I'm sure that the disciples were not expecting Jesus to respond that way. They probably thought that he would say, yeah, the temple's a beautiful place. Instead, he responded this way, and I believe that it was a shock to the disciples. And the reason why is that the Jewish life and culture was linked to that temple. If you could imagine what it would be like if someone that you had a lot of confidence in happened to predict the destruction of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. If you could just kind of think of that a little bit, you might get an idea of what it must have been for the disciples to have Jesus tell them that that temple that was so important was going to be completely destroyed. Now, the disciples were familiar with their history, with the Jewish history. They knew about Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was a magnificent temple that he built, and they knew that that temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. They knew that hundreds of years before this time. They knew this, that the reason why it was destroyed was because of the Israelites were involved in idolatry. And that's what God did. God says, this is going to be a punishment to them. So if you could think about what that would mean. Now, Jesus was saying to them, this is going to happen again. And it must have been, like I said, really a shock. And actually, Jesus was predicting this to happen. He could see the future. And it actually did happen. It's recorded in history that this temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. So this was around 40 years later that Jesus was telling them that this was going to happen. And it was destroyed in 70 A.D. by a Roman general. He was a general at the time. I believe later he became the Caesar. But it was a general by the name of Titus. And another thing that's interesting about it is that it's never been rebuilt. So since, for 1,950 years, since that temple was destroyed, the temple has never, ever been rebuilt. If you could just think about that. Now, some people think that it will be rebuilt, and when that happens, it will be a sign that the end is really close. Now, my own personal opinion is that I don't believe that, but I've been wrong before about things. But there are people that do believe that. So here's the thing: Jesus, as I mentioned, of course, he could predict the future, and he did. And after Jesus said this to the disciples, they waited until they had a chance to talk to him alone, and then they just wanted to ask him about it. So that's mentioned in verse 3. So let me read their response to what Jesus said. This is in verse 3. So in Matthew 24:3, it says, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age,'" or the end of the world, some translations say. So I wanted to mention this, that Matthew 24 is made up mainly of Jesus' answer to their question. Now, if you look close at that verse 3, you'll see that there are actually three questions. There's actually three things in there that the disciples are asking Jesus. And one of them is this: when is it that the temple will be destroyed? The second one is, what will be the sign of your coming? Now, I'm assuming that they were talking about Jesus' second coming. That may not have been. Maybe they were thinking about something else, but at least for me, I'm thinking that they were talking about what would be the sign of his coming. And the third thing they wanted to know was what will be the sign of the end of the age, or the end of the world. And the rest of the chapter is actually talking about Jesus' answer to all of these questions. So tied up in the rest of the chapter is Jesus, and it's kind of hard to interpret, because Jesus is talking about what's going to happen when the destruction of the temple takes place, but also he begins to talk about answer the other questions about what will it be like when he comes and at the end of the age. Now, we don't, like I said, we don't really have time in this video to go into those verses, and we'll probably have to wait till next time to kind of delve into some of those. So I hope this has kind of piqued your interest in the study of Matthew 24. I encourage you to read it. But we want to just say we really appreciate you tuning in and watching these videos, and we hope that you really have a good week, and we hope that you're able to join us next time. So until then, we'll wait until next time. Thank you.